Hello, and welcome to the Global Luxury Real Estate Mastermind with me, your host, Michael Valdez. Today, I have a great guest on, somebody who has found a niche in the market, really created an amazing company, and I'm really anxious to speak with Jim Brune, who is the CEO of BoardPackager. Jim, welcome to the show.
Michael, nice to be here, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just before we came on, you were telling me that you're in your place in New Orleans.
Correct. Yeah. Had something here since the early 2010s and have just really enjoyed. There's no other city like New Orleans in my mind. Just the blend of all of these varying cultures and traditions and how proud the people here are of them. It's just it's a different way of life, and it's a different way of looking at things, and I always value perspective.
Oh my God, absolutely, which is sort of how you started your company, but we'll get to that soon. But before we do that, I wanted if you could sort of share a little bit about your background, because you started in a completely different industry. You started in the oil and gas industry.
I did.
So how does that happen? How do you start there and get into real estate?
Well, originally I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, as I mentioned to you before the cast began. And so my parents both were attorneys, are attorneys, and my father was an oil and gas litigator. So being from Tulsa, Oklahoma in general, and at one point in time, Tulsa was deemed, quote unquote, the oil capital of the world, because you had a lot of East Coast people like the Gettys, the Skelleys, the Phillips. They all made their way west, and they stopped in Oklahoma in pursuit of oil. And there were fields just outside of Tulsa. They named them Glenpool. And so, Tulsa was always very oil and gas rich, because and intensive, and so many people made their fortunes there. And so the economy was heavily rooted in it. When I came home from college, I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And there were a few Fortune 500 based oil and gas companies in Tulsa. And so I applied to a company called the Williams Companies, which I got on as a trading assistant. Natural gas trading had just been, or oil and natural gas trading in general, had just been deregulated because of FERC 486. And so I had the opportunity to come in as a trading assistant. And just started from there. Worked my way through structuring financial transactions for Williams. Eventually moved to Houston. Was not a part of Enron, but when Enron did file bankruptcy, of course, it sent shockwaves throughout the entire industry. And so with my particular company where I was working at the time, I was retained to help facilitate the sale of that business. And then afterwards, I took a year off and was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with that. But ended up going to grad school, got my MBA, and then got a job in New York City. And it was tangential to energy risk management and energy trading, in the sense that my second real career was running a subsidiary, a North American subsidiary of a Tokyo-based weather risk management consulting company. And weather, energy prices are all really, they're determined on supply and demand, but of course, weather is a huge factor. So that was the element that connected all of it. And I ran North America for around 5 years. And then they wanted me to move to Tokyo, and I said, no, I needed to stay in New York. And throughout that entire time, I'd always bought and sold real estate. Real estate had always been a passion of mine. When growing up in Tulsa, my parents actually had quite a few rental properties. And I would go on weekends with my parents to help fix them up or what have you. And I actually bought my first house when I was 21.
Wow.
And so, when I was sitting there saying, well, I'm not going to Tokyo, and no one's really hiring. It was 2010. No one's really hiring ex-CEOs of North American subsidiaries of Tokyo-based weather risk management companies. And so I just decided to get my real estate license. And I started telling people that's what I was doing. And it was interesting because we were just coming off the financial crisis.
Yep.
And so the market in Manhattan and Brooklyn, the 5 boroughs, was not very good. So it was not necessarily a great time to dive into the wonderful wide world of real estate. But it just so happened that I ended up, it was a perfect time because I caught the wave. We saw this increase in demand and traction towards the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. And that helped in terms of being able to really solidify a spot in New York City real estate to become, thankfully, and it was surprising, Rookie of the Year at Douglas Elliman. And so that was quite.
So I think it's really interesting because I think that from your analytical and financial mind coming into a market like that, back then I came from a banking world,
Yes,
also with Deutsche Bank
right?
for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And so when that happened, I actually, 2009 and 2010 were the best years of my selling career. And
Sure.
that was because the market shifted, right? And it was all about perspective, which is really where you've really succeeded in this industry, is perspective. And so I was working with vulture funds coming into, I was living in Miami at the time, and in that Miami market, it was the market.
It was blood everywhere.
It was blood, right? And it was like aptly named vulture funds, but it was what it was, right? And so then you came in, you became Rookie of the Year in 2012 at Douglas Elliman. So tell me a little bit about now you're in your 3rd career, right? With sort of like oil and gas, the weather executive, now we're into real estate. And so you've always had this entrepreneurial spirit about you, but now that your focus is, okay, now I'm selling real estate, we're going to let everyone know, and because you had to do that in order to get Rookie of the Year. Tell me a little bit about discipline. What did you do? How did that happen for you to get there? Because I know a lot of my colleagues that work with DE, and that bar is high. So tell me what you were doing there.
Well, so it was really a bit of soul searching because at that particular point in time, I was in my mid-30s, and I had wondered whether I'd peaked, to be honest. And so I had to really give some thought to the approach that I was going to take. And the approach that I was going to take was I could see in the market a need for someone or some entity that could put some analyses behind these assets, right? Now, granted, it is a business transaction, but it's also pretty personal too.
Yeah.
So if you can combine those 2 elements, if you can speak to the rational, if you can speak to the heart, then that is a recipe for success. But it took some time to develop it. I knew that was I thought it was my initial philosophy, but I also had to know what I was doing. So my first few clients, it was mainly all buy side that rookie year, and thankfully people were starting to come into the market. Some wanted to make 40% off offers.
Yeah,
I remember some of those calls, and agents not very happy with me. But at the same time, what I had to do was I really had to understand the city. And even though I had been living in the city for, at that particular time, 7 years, every single aspect of Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens, there are all these micro markets, if you will. And so I began working with people who had reached out after I had said that this is what I was doing with my life. And I was, I was fortunate to do a couple of deals, 3 deals actually, but in that year. But then there was one that I'd been working on for almost a year, a buy-side client, and it was a West Village townhouse. And so every time I went out with this particular client, I would spend time on each property beforehand, going to Property Shark, like reading public records, what have you, right? Trying to get an understanding, an innate understanding of that particular asset. Then, of course, if we're scheduling times to go view, I would put them together. I would spend like a day scheduling, and then I would go and I would walk the entire route. And I would make observations as to what was there. Oh, the Equinox is only 2 blocks that way, or there's a bodega on the corner, or here's your dry cleaners, or what have you, right? And it was that I had a spreadsheet that I would actually print out and I'd carry with me, and it had all these columns, and it would have specifics like number of beds, baths, square footage, lot size, build size, taxes, all of these things, price per square foot. And so I'd actually just memorized it. And so if I got asked a question, it'd be like, yeah, no, it's $1,500 a square foot, whatever.
You were the Rain Man of real estate, basically.
No, well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I would not say that at all. I would say that I worked pretty hard to try to,
that's awesome,
to remember all of those things. There's so many different variables. And so it ended up, I mentioned I'd been working with this client for, actually at that particular point in time, yeah, it was maybe a little over a year. And I remember there was a broker I was working with. My client was interested in this townhouse, and this particular broker couldn't show it. And I said, well, my client wants it. So I'm pretty sure he will move very quickly. And so you can trust me with the keys, and I can open the townhouse, or maybe we move on and not buy it. And so this broker reluctantly gave me the keys, because I understand, I was new to the business, and it's a trust thing, and I get that. And so my client ended up buying it. We closed December 28th of that year. And so that's what made me Rookie of the Year, that last minute December 28th closing.
There is a lot that is takeaways from what you just said, and it's really about preparation, because we start talking about, in this industry that we are all working in this day and age where information is just so readily available, right, you have to have a lot more than what anyone can find on Zillow or Realtor or whomever they're using for their initial search. So they don't need us for that. They need someone that gives them everything you did. And so what we talk about so often on this podcast is really that sense of being that expert. And you truly were. You gave the value of what somebody wanted. You were not a transactional broker. You were an advisor at that point.
Oh, I think if you have the approach that you're a transactional broker, you don't succeed ultimately, in my mind.
Say that again. Say that again. Say that again. Please.
You have to always have the approach that you're an advisor, and you are there every single step of the way, no matter how long it takes. And quite frankly, I've worked with one buy-side client for 5 years before this client finally found the apartment that worked. And the minute that you start saying to yourself that I've spent too much time on this and nothing's going to happen, then you are putting your interests before your clients, and they will know.
Exactly. Oh my God, this is so golden nuggets that are so true in our industry, so needed to be repeated so often, because, listeners are at different stages in their career with this podcast, right? And it's people that are learning from those that have done it and done it successfully. But I want to get to the company you formed, because for those that don't know the New York market, there is a co-op world here. And since this is a global podcast, I would love it if you can talk a little bit about what co-ops are and then the niche that you found in the marketplace. So talk about the co-op market. What was the big challenge and the solution you so wonderfully actually created?
Well, thank you for the kind words, Michael. And I will correct you, it's co-op and condo.
Well, that's true, right? Yeah,
So,
right.
And how this all got started was essentially one deal that I had it was buy side, and I was trying to get information on a particular building, and I couldn't Google who the management company was. I actually had to go to the building itself and ask the doorman who the managing agent was. And then I had to call, and I got routed to 2 or 3 different people. And really what I was looking for was a financial statement of the building to understand the overall health, whether maintenance or common charges had been increased over time and by how much, how much was in reserves, was there litigation in the building, things like when you're a buyer in a high-rise multifamily, you're not just buying the apartment, you're buying into the entire building, and it's good and it's bad. Right?
Yes.
So
it's like marrying into the family, right?
For sure it is.
Yes.
And so this particular client, I couldn't get the financial statement in time. This apartment was going to a highest and best. So, we were in that situation. We won the bidding. I did finally get the financial statement after sending a check for $50 and waiting, I think it was 3 days, and I got it via email. But I thought, there is a issue here in terms of just access to information that is needed to make an informed decision on an asset purchase that is a very large one. This particular apartment, this was $4.1 million. And so you don't want to, whether it's $100,000 or 4.1 million or 10 million or 20 million, you don't take any of this lightly. So then I was, of course, this was a co-op, and co-ops, sure, I'll explain the difference between co-ops and condos. So with cooperative ownership, so there is a corporation that owns the building. And when you as a buyer buy into a cooperative, you receive shares in the corporation and a proprietary lease for your apartment, right? And that is different, of course, from a condo where it is deeded property, and that you do have a percentage of the overall common areas as well as part of that, right? So with the cooperative, and actually it's interesting because in certain markets, my understanding, and I know that condo boards will also do an interview of a prospective buyer.
Right.
In New York City, it's the cooperative boards that do that interview. So with that process, you are required to submit what is called a board package, right? And in New York City, it is, whether it's a condo or a cooperative, you must have this board package. And they are very similar in nature. And they are required for purchase, a lease, a sublease, a refinance. If you're doing an alteration to your unit in that building, you must submit a board package. Lease renewals are a little different, but yet there is some element to it. The board doesn't necessarily approve those. They can just happen. But so with this board package for this apartment that I'd finally gotten the financial statement for, I started to assemble it. And this one happened to be, in the end, after collating all of the various pages, a little over 500, because we were looking
pages.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's 500 pages for one board.
Now, I've done a board package that ended up being 1,210 pages because this particular buy side, there were 3 individuals that were going to be on the stock and lease. So it was a father, mother, they were divorced, and then the daughter.
Okay.
But but we're talking about the 500 pager. So
Yeah.
I was getting documents via FedEx, via fax, via courier. I was getting them via email attachment. I was printing them out. I was putting them together, collating them on my desk. And I thought, God, there's got to be a better way to do this. Technology exists for this, right? But it was interesting because that particular building, there were 7 board members and they required an original and then they 7 copies for each board. So I waited until the office had emptied and I started running my 7 copies of a 500 page. Well, first I had to make a copy of the original so that I could, black out any sort of sensitive information. And then I made 7 copies of that and I had 2 copiers going. And after 15 minutes, the first one jammed and I couldn't repair it. And after about another 15 to 20 minutes, the second one jammed and it was toast. So I had to take all of this mess and I went across the street to the Staples and I spent $600 making copies. And because this wasn't just a plain black and white, I mean, there were beautiful color charts and things like that. And you want the package to look good. So it was that next day, I packed up a couple boxes and I had the checks for the fees. And I went to the management company and I handed it to the receptionist. And there was no indication as to who was ultimately going to receive it, when it was going to be reviewed, when it was going to the board. And so the idea, it was interesting because I had reconnected with a friend from high school and invested in his med tech startup. And I was like, and he's with the company today, he's our COO. And I was like, we've got to do something about this. Like, it has to be a better way. And you mentioned niche, right? At a particular point in time, it really was trying to digitize this process to make it more efficient, to make it secure. And, but I really didn't realize the impact that it ultimately would have and the amount of stakeholders it would impact. Because if you think about how many different people are involved in one transaction, you've got, and in New York, it's a little different because attorneys are involved here, whereas other states, they're not. But you've got a buy-side attorney, a sell-side attorney, you've got buyer, multiple buyers, you've got the broker, buy-side, sell-side, you've got the management company, you've got the board of directors. In a lease, there could be a guarantor, right? And all of those individuals are connected to this process and this application in varying ways at various times. And so what we ultimately realized was that we were actually building an enterprise software solution that was really ultimately transaction management. So we it was a niche. We are condo cooperative. We are doing some rental buildings as well because our management companies want to have one system to process all applications. And so those are coming into the system as well. And really we're now a little over 3,000 buildings, 250,000 units in the 5 boroughs. We have a few buildings in New Jersey, and we're also going to South Florida. And we launched the software in January of 2018. So it's been, yes, and if we think about the COVID world, really the process of applications, and let's talk about New York City, had been a decades old process, right? And that involved a lot
quite flawed.
Yeah, you could make that argument. We saw something that I thought needed to be solved, and thankfully a lot of people agreed. But we had the onset of COVID, the executive order on March 22nd of last year, suspended all real estate showings, suspended really non-essentials from going into the office. And that affected management companies. They needed a way, had they not been remote, they needed to get remote very quickly. And that impacted receiving, physical paper copies of something or physical checks for payments. And it became a bottleneck if they couldn't be in the office to do that, right? Even to disseminate board of directors meeting minutes as part of the diligence process in the buy side transaction. So, and we formed a tool to be able to securely do that as well. But it really was a call to action in the sense that we needed to have that ability in New York City for the process to continue uninterrupted in a digital way.
I think that's really amazing that you found this incredible opportunity, and it was because of the challenges that you faced, right? And trying to sort of get a deal done. And right. It's something that people had been going through the same struggles, to your point, for decades. And it was then it just needed you to get the solution. So congratulations on that.
Well, it takes a team.
It does. It always
I've
does.
done it without Ming, our COO, and the people that we have at BoardPackager.
I love your humility. That's wonderful.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about, somebody coming into the industry today. Tell me 3 things that you would say to somebody coming in, 3 pieces of advice.
So are we talking brokerage, or are we talking prop tech?
We're talking brokerage.
Okay. I would say that I would say own it. Know your capability, know exactly what your focus is going to be, and just hit it on a daily basis. Daily, I'm talking 7 days a week, right? Because that's what it takes. Know that it's going to take a year, if not longer, to really establish a business. And people will forget about you if you're not out in it. So it's one of those things. But at the same time, I think people will identify when somebody is overexposed as well. So
that's actually really fair. There's a good balance there, isn't there?
There has to be a balance that you strike. So be careful in your approach, in your words. There will be many instances. I actually, this is when I first got started. Of course, I was tracking everything in spreadsheets, and I was tracking every deal that I had been a part of, whether it was closed or not. And I started to see that the non-closed deals were outweighing the closed deals. And I was getting pretty upset. And a very good friend of mine, Max, he looked at me and he said, you're gonna run yourself into the ground if that's how you look at it.
Yeah. And
he was absolutely right. And so then, it is to the point, and, I have a brokerage team of really smart people, accomplished people who are helping. And when I see I have a rookie that's come on, and it is I can see how it's like, oh, I should have gotten that. Like, what happened? Like, no, we need to correct this kind of thing. And it really is nope, move on. If you spend your time dwelling on what was lost, then you will be lost yourself.
That's right. Absolutely. I love that one.
Yeah.
That's great. What's the greatest lesson you've learned in your career thus far?
I think that, so I was thinking about this question, and the other day I was in a store, and I saw these cocktail napkins, and they were just plain white cocktail napkins, and in black lettering were the words, "May the bridges you burn light the way." And
Nice.
I like started laughing. And I was like, this is the complete antithesis of my philosophy. But I love it because I've watched so many people do it, right? They have this mindset that whatever, I'm right. I'm 100% like, my vision is what it is and screw everybody else kind of thing. And I don't think you accomplish really much of anything ultimately by that attitude. I think that we are all human beings. We are all in this together in a varying way, shape, or form. And we all have to learn how to tolerate, to live with one another, to thrive, to collaborate. And yes, there are people that are going to try to do certain things to you at certain times. And maybe you give as good as you get, but ultimately, I think it is there is a way to when there are willing parties, there is a way to get something done.
Yeah.
Always.
And, it's funny because when I read that quote or a similar quote to that, I internalized it. So for me, it was the bridges of, say, your past and things that were your own sort of limiting sort of recordings in your mind. And it's burning those bridges so that the future is bright for yourself.
That's a great perspective. And, this is why we're talking. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
And I can understand that too.
Yeah.
But
where there's no sense of a safety net or a plan B. Well, all you need to do is be able to succeed.
Right.
Yeah. And so I love that though, but I love that quote. I love
it. I've thought about giving them as gifts to certain people, but ultimately I've just kept them for myself.
With a little sort of caveat as to what the meeting should be.
Oh, I don't know. Que sera, sera. Everyone has their own interpretation. So.
All right, so I'm going to sort of stay on this route for a second. So what piece of advice, a singular piece of advice, would you give your 10-year-old self with the knowledge that you have now?
It would be to try everything and evaluate everything and know whether it strikes something within you that's innate. I think from a very early age as to what resonates with you, what you like, what you don't like, what you think you can be good at with hard work or practice, what you think you are not good at or won't be good at, despite how much effort you put into it, right? I think that we all have, the beautiful part about humanity is we have all of these different traits and qualities that can be complementary to one another. Not every one is the end all and be all for everything. It takes us all. And so I might be good at one thing and somebody else good at another. And the thing about knowing this about yourself and realizing that about others is you can say, I know you're really good at this. Please, I need your help. Can you help me here? And then in turn, they can say, I know you're really good at that. Please, can we help each other? And so I think that, when I was growing up, there was a certain path.
Yeah.
Both my parents were educated, college, graduate school. And, that was going to be my path, and I did get accepted into law school. And at the very, very last minute, I said no.
Yeah.
But one of my sisters is an attorney, brother-in-law, I kind of come from that. And I think that if I were looking back on my 10-year-old self, I would say, try everything and see what fits, because you will probably know even then. And maybe it's not something at that particular time that is in vogue or socially acceptable for a young 10-year-old, but it could be. I think what has been proven over time is that those that have that conviction are very successful in a myriad of different ways. No matter what the conviction is, they just know that they can be good at this. They are good at this, and they have this to give.
Jim, it's sort of like, this is the first time we're meeting, and it's sort of, and it really is such a pleasure because I'm drawing so much from what you're talking about. And so you have a very, very sort of spiritual base about you and in caring about others, which is really beautiful to witness. Where did that come from? It exudes from you.
I don't know. I think that, there's so many different things that shape our life and our experience. Sure. And I think that I am the oldest, and my parents did divorce early on, and being the oldest and the only boy, and us being very close in age, we had each other, and we had to get through a traumatic event together. Yeah. So that probably is one of the factors that has shaped my approach.
I love that. I love that. So tell me about a book that you've read more than once and why.
So it's not a business book.
Good. I like that.
Although they are, I'm fascinated by them, and I'm currently about to start the book on Adam Newman, I think, in WeWork. So that will be an interesting one. But there is this book that was actually made into a book. It's from a series of storytelling events called The Moth. And I don't know if you've heard of The Moth, but
I have not.
Check it out. They were in-person events where individual would get up and tell a short story about his or her life or something that is experiential for it. But there is an author who put together a collection of these stories, and this particular Moth book is called All These Wonders: True Stories About the Unknown. And life is full of unknowns, right? And so, I immediately opened the book and I started reading. And really, it's attesting, these stories are attesting to the varieties and the travails of our collective existence, and crises and how we deal with them. And it's honest without fear. And when I started reading this one particular story in general, but I read this book often because I want to remind myself of this, right? When you're starting a company, the philosophy is you're Teddy Roosevelt's man in the arena. All kinds of people are throwing things at you. Yeah. You think, am I going to be able to pull this off? There are times when you think that you might be staring into an abyss and you don't know necessarily what the next move is, but then you keep plugging away and it happens, right? Yeah. And so, the theory for me is that reading these stories of these collective experiences reminds me that, I'm not in this alone. I'm not necessarily the man in the arena, although society expects a man in an arena, right? So there's this one story about he was a former child soldier in Sierra Leone. Mm-hmm. And it was the Civil War there. This author is a human rights activist. His name's Ishmael Bea. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he had been adopted because his family had been killed in this Civil War. And he came to New York. And his adopted mother had enrolled him in school in the city. And eventually he was invited by some friends to go upstate to the country. And they decided that they wanted to play paintball. And he had never played paintball before. And so he was learning the rules of the game and studying. And he references this in the story that, it came back to his being a child soldier and assessing the terrain and assessing the personalities and understanding, how many steps it was to this point or what have you. And so they started the game and everybody immediately dispersed. And his whole ideology was, well, let's let them start moving around or whatever, and let them get tired and worked up. And then, I can sense, I can hear, I know where everyone is, for the most part, and I can just come up and immediately pop them and they're done. Right. So, I mean, he beat everybody, and people were like, who the hell are you? How did you know how to do this? Right. Because he never spoke of his background.
Yeah.
No one had any idea.
Wow.
And so it was interesting because, his perspective was that these people had a naive innocence. They had no idea. They could pretend a war, but, he had experienced real war.
Lived in it. Wow.
Lived in it. Right. And so, I think back on that story, and I think, what a perfect kind of mantra, in the sense of, he innately knew things about himself. He was able to assess an environment. He was able to not necessarily put himself first, but he was able to adeptly navigate a situation. And he was never asked to play paintball again.
In fact, he put himself last because he let everyone else go and do everything, and he just observed.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Yep. And he said that he stepped out and they started playing, and then they would talk about who won that particular game, but it was
That's really powerful, actually.
Yeah. So I highly recommend that collection.
I already written it down. I have one final question for you, Jim. So,
Sure.
Staying on a literary theme, in your book of life, what's this chapter called?
I think it's called The Beginning.
Ooh, I
think that I have spent the years that I've had accumulating a set of tools, and I've started to begin to really know every single tool that's in my toolbox, to truly understand how it can effectively and efficiently be used to fix certain things. And so that's why I say it's really just the beginning, because I have this tool set now that I can begin to start solving some things. So
love that. Well, I have to tell you something, Jim. It's, I've done this about a year and a half now. So we've done about 70 or 80 interviews at this point. And
it's great. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. But you know what? I've never interviewed someone who I didn't know personally. And actually,
really?
We share a friend in common.
We
and
do.
So it was wonderful.
Very
but
cool.
I actually want to thank you so much, because throughout this whole thing, I thought as though I was talking to a friend. And after today, I'm hoping that is the case, because you're a wonderful person. I love your spirit. And I thank you so much for being on this show.
Michael, it's a true pleasure meeting with you and talking with you. And I know that to be true, that we will be friends. And congratulations on really your great success.
Thank you.
The proliferation of this podcast. I think it's wonderful.
Thank you.
And your career as well.
Thank you. You're very kind. And thank you for all of you for listening. This has been the Global Luxury Real Estate Mastermind with me, your host, Michael Valdez.